Psych with Mike and Brett is now a book. Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, is our new book that's available at Kendall Hunt, Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon. Pick up a copy today and leave a review. Also, find us on YouTube and subscribe to the podcast. That really helps us out. Now, it's time for Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. I'm the host, Dr. Michael Mahan, and if you have viewed the show before, you may look at this picture and say something seems different, and it is true. Mr. Brett Newcomb has officially retired completely. I did a video about that last week, which I will pin up in the corner here if you want to go back and take a look at that. But what that means is that the show is in transition as I am in transition. And I have some ideas about what I want to do, but what I really would be interested in is hearing what you want. So please, please, please be interactive and give me some feedback. Let me know what it is that you are looking for. If there are specific topics you would like me to cover, people that you would like me to try and get on the show to talk to, whatever it is that you have in mind that you would like to see the show be, give me some feedback and let me know. I will try and apply as many of those ideas as I possibly can. In the meantime, what I am looking for is to do some unpacking of some psychological concepts. So today we are going to be talking about cognitive dissonance and anxiety. I also would like to do some interviews, and I have a couple of guests that I want to talk to that I am working on getting on the show. I have some new people who are going to be interacting with the show in various capacities, whether that be on the show, whether that be behind the scenes, and I will talk more about that as those things are more concrete. But basically, I'm in a transition period. I want the show to be something that people enjoy but also find useful, so I'm looking for feedback. I want to do some things, but I also want the show to be reflective of what you want as an audience or people who have been with us since we started back in 2018. So that said, today I'm going to talk about cognitive dissonance. This is something that you have probably heard me talk about many times before if you have ever listened to the show. But my philosophy is that anxiety is really a function of what we call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a concept in psychology defined as the difficulty that the human brain has in holding two conflicting thoughts simultaneously. So for me, I have typically seen a lot of adolescent males, and I frequently have people come to my office and say things like, "Oh, I would like to ask so-and-so out." But then they follow that up with, so then I say, "Well, have you done that?" And they follow that up with, "Well, no, what if she says no?" So now I'm left with cognitive dissonance. I have two conflicting thoughts. I would like to ask this person out, but I am afraid of rejection. So what is the solution to that problem? The solution is to actually take action to ask her out, or decide that you're not going to ask her out, and then be willing to accept whatever that result is. But we don't do that. So let's unpack that a little bit more. First off, I believe that anxiety, so non-fear-based anxiety, is the result of cognitive dissonance. So whenever you experience anxiety, it's not because you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. So we can look at depression and talk about different ways that we can track chemicals in your brain and how those are either in a deficit or in an abundance, and how that affects the way that your brain operates. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that has been identified in a lot of different things, including addiction. And so we have drugs that we know can affect the levels of dopamine. One of the most probably well-known drugs that we have actually affects another neurotransmitter called serotonin. So a serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor, or an SSRI, is a class of drugs that is designed to make more serotonin available in your brain. And that is, in theory, a way of combating the biological underpinnings, the biological foundations of depression. We don't have a similar neurotransmitter that we identify, or even a broad scope of neurotransmitters that we identify as playing a role in anxiety. We can define how anxiety works, how it physiologically happens in your body, but it isn't a ineffective use of neurotransmitters that causes anxiety. So we can't give somebody a medication that actually treats it. We can give somebody what's called a benzodiazepine, which actually anesthetizes the central nervous system, and so it treats the symptoms of the anxiety but doesn't treat the anxiety itself, because the anxiety is what we experience from our cognitive dissonance. So when we have those conflicting thoughts rubbing up against each other, the friction that they create is what we experience as anxiety. So most of our non-fear-based anxieties, and we'll talk in the future what is the difference between a fear-based and non-fear-based anxiety. But for today, we're talking specifically about non-fear-based anxieties. Those are the result of a thought process. So I have two conflicting thoughts. They're rubbing up against each other. I have anxiety. I would like to ask a girl out. I'm afraid of rejection. Those two thoughts rub up against each other. They cause friction. That friction is what we experience as anxiety. So the only real way to be able to treat anxiety for any person is to resolve the cognitive dissonance. So how do I resolve the cognitive dissonance? What I tell people is you have to be willing to make a decision and live with the consequences. Human beings tend to be very, very good at making a choice, making a decision. We tend to be very bad at living with the consequences. And so what ultimately happens is that we end up living our lives in a perpetual Schrodinger experiment. So if you have ever studied physics, you may know the name Erwin Schrodinger. He was a physicist who was talking about something called the uncertainty principle. And this is being able to define the position of an atomic particle. We don't have to talk about what that all means, but basically he conducted this thought experiment that helped people to understand what is called superposition in physics. And his thought experiment goes like this. If you take a cat and put the cat in a box, and you have a pellet of cyanide that is going to release randomly, so you don't know when that's going to happen, and you seal the box, 5 minutes later, is the cat alive or dead? And the answer is you don't know, because you can't know until you open the box and observe the position of the cat. So while the box is sealed, the cat is both alive and dead simultaneously. And that's what we do with our cognitive dissonance. We want to be able to hold all of our options available to us all at the same time. So I want to ask this girl out, but I'm afraid of rejection. So what I do is I don't act. I don't ask her out, and that way I can have a fantasy of having a relationship with her without ever actually suffering the negative consequences of potential rejection. But the truth is, that is just a fantasy. It's not real. I haven't asked her out. I'm not in a relationship with her. But what ends up happening, even, which I think is even more detrimental, is that while I'm living that fantasy, I'm probably not acting on finding someone else to be with. So what we do is that we live in these perpetual Schrodinger experiments. I'm locked into this position where I have this potential relationship with this girl. I'm not suffering the consequences of potential rejection because I'm not asking her out, but then I'm also not finding somebody else that I could be in an actual relationship with. Because my recommendation to this individual is, well, ask her out. If you ask her out, you make a choice and you live with the consequences. Ask her out. She's going to say yes or no. She might say yes. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, if I ask somebody, if you were to ask 100 people out on a date, how many do you think would say yes? I've never had anybody say less than 50. So most people have an optimistic impression of their ability to be successful asking people out as a general concept. But when they get down to, okay, go ask Sally out, they become very aware of the potential for rejection, and that becomes debilitating. So then they don't want to actually ask her out. But if you ask her out, you're either going to get a yes or a no. If you get a yes, you are potentially in a relationship. If you get a no, you're freed up to go find someone else that you could be in a relationship with. Resolving the cognitive dissonance is always better for the individual. There is, as far as I can tell, never a situation where not resolving cognitive dissonance is a negative or a positive. If you hold on to the cognitive dissonance, you are creating anxiety. You are perpetually living with the ever apparent anxiety of not making a choice. If you make a choice, you could have to face rejection, but that would free you up to be able to actually go find a relationship that you could legitimately be in. So it's always better to resolve your cognitive dissonance, but it is difficult for people to actually take action and follow through with that. So don't forget, Brett and I wrote a book, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human. It is available at Kendall Hunt, Barnes & Noble, and at Amazon. If you pick up a copy, please leave us a review on Amazon. That is super, super helpful for us. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. Remember, send me some feedback. Let me know what you think about the show, what you would like the show to be, where you would like to see the show go in the future. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.